Hello everybody, I'm Rob D. Welcome to Sketchcraft, and here's some quick Copic tips as I color this Ratchet. So basically the kind of paper that I'm using is B paper. B makes some paper, BEE. It's called marker manga illustration paper. I like it. It's really smooth. Gives me creates a lot of the streaks that I like. Shows off a lot of the marker texture. So what I'm doing here first is basically anytime I start coloring with Copic markers, I'll start off with the value base, which is sort of a W3, right? A W1 or W3, warm gray 1, warm gray 3, or a cool gray 1. Usually a warm gray 1 for the most part, like you see here. I'll also outline the character really thickly with that gray, mostly because as I add in the colors, anytime you put a color next to white, it will appear darker in the color spectrum, because white is the brightest value there is. So by adding that little warm gray outline, it just allows the colors to appear as bright as they actually are and not darker. Then I'll add like a nice purple mix to the shade just to tint it a little bit, and I usually use a BV00. It's a very, very light purple. I always use as many light Copics as possible. I want to start off with the lightest colors and then you go dark. It's kind of like watercolor a lot. I do a lot of watercolor painting, so I use a lot of my same techniques with the Copics. I do a lot of blending in marker as opposed to using a colorless blender, mostly because the colorless blender will push the color around, and I like to mess with the actual color, kind of mix yellows in. That's what's happening right here with Ratchet's fur, is that I didn't really have the colors for this character. I didn't have the oranges, I didn't have the browns, a lot of my markers were dead, so I was creating a lot of his colors by doing light glazing layers. So I'm adding a lot of little pinks to his ear, very light shades of pink, very light shades of purple into his skin tones, allowing the alcohol to dry for a couple minutes, and then going back in and adding in an extra purple shade to his gloves you see down there, and then I'll add an extra warm gray. It's closing to brown I had, and I kind of had this kind of dummy old Blick marker that was a little tan. But you know, if you add enough color, eventually everything will turn to mud anyhow. So the question is, how can you shift that to your liking? Now with browns and things like that, anything organic, I don't really want that to appear lifeless and dull. So I want nice little purple mixes, red mixes in there. In order to get those kind of like reddish browns and those like slight purple mixes, you got to have like a lot of like little thin layers of color. If you see in his glove right there, very quickly, I actually shaded that with a dark violet as opposed to a black or something like that. And then as it dries and oxidizes, the color will mix in there. So try to understand that, like if you're unfamiliar with mixing color, experiment with actual, I call them like stainers. Like you start light, then actually use purples, use blues, use cool colors to make things darker and more hard. Use warm colors to make things seem like they have like life. The very last thing I'm going to do to this image, by the way, when I get all done here, is I will add white highlights. That'll start around the 4-minute mark. The white highlights I sort of use to pop the image out, since it is a drawing. I like that little pop feel. And with that, I'll be using calligraphy ink as opposed to, say, white gouache or white acrylic, because you add water to those mediums, and anytime you add water to alcohol mix, you're going to get warpage on the paper, things like that. This is very thin paper, so I like to just pop that in with calligraphy ink. But right there, I'm adding cools into the, that's a cool gray into the metal in Ratchet's little tool there. I save the cool grays for metal, metallic objects, and then the warm grays for anything that's going to be organic. And that can help just sort of subtly shift the tone and the value of the piece from obviously from warm to cool, right? So what else here? So yeah, the gloves were a real challenge. They were a real challenge, and you can see me adding like little bits of yellow into the highlight just to kind of edge outline. There's a lot of little flicking with the tips. I use that super brush a lot. But you can use a harder brush for things like the gloves where you want these big stained pieces. And turns out that it worked out pretty good. In the end, it all came together. So I think total time to finish this was about 90 minutes. Probably could have done it in about an hour or 40 minutes. But, I give myself up to 2 hours anytime I color something, just to, take my time and have fun with it. This was a great challenge. I did it on Livestream. If you have any questions, quips, whatever, hit me up at rob@Sketchcraft. That's Sketchcraft. Sketchcraft.com. I have a podcast. I talk about all my work all the time. You can answer all your questions there, explain how I make stuff, so forth and so forth. I really appreciate you all hanging out, and I look forward to doing this again. Until next time, I'm Rob D. Talk to y'all later. Goodbye.